We now come to the backbench business motion on the 25th anniversary of the Kurdish genocide. Nadhim Zahawi to move.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I stand, as you noticed, Mr Deputy Speaker, not from my usual place in this House. I chose to sit next to the member for Harlow purposely today because I think in this Parliament no one has done more for the cause of the Kurdish people and the recognition of the genocide than the member of Harlow. Indeed, he chairs the Genocide Task Force in this House. Mr Deputy Speaker, as the horrors of the Holocaust pass beyond living memory, there is a danger that we drop our guard, that we believe such terrible events are safely sealed in the history books, that they could never happen again. But the truth is, they've already happened again. Genocide did not end with the fall of the Third Reich in 1945. The Srebrenica genocide in 1995 saw 8,000 Bosnians murdered en masse. The Rwandan genocide in 1994 saw over 500,000 people killed in just 100 days. And between 1960 and 1991, the campaign of persecution unleashed by Saddam Hussein against his own people, singling out the Kurdish community, saw over 1 million people disappear, most presumed dead, murdered by government forces. Yet only the first two have been recognised officially as genocide. No international criminal tribunal has been convened to investigate the extermination of the Kurdish people. There has been no international campaign to bring those responsible for these atrocities to justice. The British government have not formally stated that the actions of Saddam and his lieutenants constituted genocide. That, Mr Deputy Speaker, is something that must be put right. To many people, the plight of the Kurds in Iraq remains unknown. The demonisation, the internment camps, the gassings, the mass graves, these are images that take us to the darkest depths of the 1940s and not the 1980s. Yet Saddam Hussein and the Ba'athist regime carried out these actions. The Iraqi Kurds endured a systematic military program of discrimination, demonisation, removal and death. So-called men of battle age, a definition that included tall, strong boys as young as 12, were rounded up and thousands of women and children vanished. Strong evidence shows many were taken to internment camps where they were executed or died from malnutrition and torture. When coalition forces entered Iraq looking for the weapons of mass destruction, they instead found mass graves and the thousands of bodies that they were concealing. Men, women and children, all killed for nothing other than their ethnicity, their bodies hidden from the eyes of the world. This year is the 25th anniversary of the final act in this persecution. The Anfal Campaign, literally translated, it means the spoils of war. This last and best known phase took place in 1988 when over 182,000 Kurds are believed to have died. 182,000 people, Mr Deputy Speaker. 182,000 men, women and children systematically wiped out. All in all, over 2,000 Kurdish villages and towns were destroyed, including the town of Qaladiza, which along with its 70,000 inhabitants was literally wiped off the map. Let me put this in context for you, sir. This is enough people to fill Wembley Stadium twice over. Or when compared to the horrors of September 11th, the attacks against the USA, it is 60 times the 3,000 innocents killed on that terrible, terrible day. Yet even that was not the worst of it. On March the 16th, 1988, Iraqi planes bombed the town of Halabja with mustard gas and some suspect other nerve agents such as sarin and VX. 5,000 civilians died in incredible agony that day, and estimates suggest a further 7,000 were injured or suffered long-term illness. For years afterwards, Many babies were born with deformities. And even today, if you visit Halabja, as I have done, you will see mass grave sites and the basements of bombed-out buildings remain contaminated. For me, the events hold a personal significance, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I am proud to be the first British MP of Kurdish descent, and it was the persecution of the Kurdish people that brought my family to the safe haven of Great Britain. As an 8-year-old boy, I remember standing with my mother at Baghdad International Airport, watching my father attempt to flee that country, boarding a plane for the safe haven of Britain. The night before, he'd been tipped off that the regime was planning on coming for him. As the plane taxis towards the runway, we watched in horror as an army vehicle stopped the plane and the soldiers boarded it. It was only later that we discovered that they had taken the man sitting right next to him. That, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was the life of a Kurdish family in Iraq, waiting for the knock on the door in the middle of the night, knowing that they could be coming for you, living in fear. In 1988, as news of Halabja reached the Kurdish community overseas, we all waited for the media to take notice. In a box in my attic, I have some of the first photographs to get out of that region. They are, as you can imagine, Mr. Deputy Speaker, horrifying. Yet Saddam's spin machine had gone into overdrive. No gas had been used, they said, and the first Western journalists didn't visit the area until over a week later. What confronted them was truly terrible. Writing in The Guardian, David Hurst described the scene. This is what he said: "The skin of the bodies is strangely discoloured, with their eyes open and staring, where they have not disappeared into their sockets, a greyish slime oozing from their mouths, and their fingers still grotesquely twisted. Death seemingly caught them almost unawares in the midst of their household chores. They had just the strength, some of them, to make it to the doorways of their homes, only to collapse there, or a few feet beyond. Here a mother seems to have clasped her children in a last embrace. There an old man shields an infant from he cannot have known what." Even after that, there was still scepticism from many. Yet this was just the culmination of a decade-long campaign against the Kurdish people, the final stage of the regime's attempts to wipe out the Kurdish people in Iraq. Saddam had unleashed all the resources of a modern, industrialized state on the Kurdish population of his own country. His forces used chemical weapons, concentration camps, and aerial bombardment, all methods that were last seen during the Second World War. If it was not genocide, Mr. Deputy Speaker, then what, one has to ask, what would it be? Mr. Deputy Speaker, the crime of genocide was brought into law to prosecute those put on trial at Nuremberg. The word comes from the Greek for race and the Latin for killing. The literal meaning is clear, but legally it requires the aggressor to have pre-planned the destruction of a national group. In their investigation, Human Rights Watch are clear that this was the case, and they stated this: "This crime far transcended legitimate counterinsurgency and includes the murder and disappearance of tens of thousands of non-combatants due to their ethnic national identity. The fact that some of these atrocities took place during the Iran-Iraq war or during a time of uprising have led some to argue that they were war crimes or crimes against humanity. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I disagree. There is no doubt there were atrocities committed in conflict. But what occurred in Kurdistan, the mass killings of civilians, women and children, was not a conflict. One side could not and did not fight back. Nor was it random violence. It was the planned destruction of the Kurdish population. Prior to asking for this debate, I launched an e-petition calling for the government to recognise formally the genocide against the people of Iraqi Kurdistan. As of this morning, it had nearly 28,000 signatures, and at 10,000 signatures, it received a response from the government. In their response, the government stated this: "It remains the government's view that it is not for the government to decide whether a genocide has been committed in this case, as this is a complex legal question. Where an international judicial body finds a crime to have been a genocide, however, this will often play an important part in whether we will recognise one as such. Yet without international pressure, it is unlikely that an international judicial body will begin a prosecution in order to provide that important part that the government requires. Then there is also the fact that many of those responsible, including Saddam himself, were tried and executed for other crimes before an international court could intervene on the question of genocide. However, in March 2010, the Iraqi Supreme Court ruled that the operations of 1988 were genocide. This was 4 years after Saddam was executed for crimes against humanity. But there is no doubt now that he should also have stood trial for genocide as well. I will.
And I apologise for being a couple of minutes late for the start of his speech, which caught me out. I think the case he's making is very strong. Isn't it also the fact that some other countries' parliaments have already said, in their opinion, Norway being one, that there was a genocide, and therefore the defence, the position that the British government is taking, needs to be reconsidered?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. He's absolutely right, and I'm coming to that in my speech. It's not just Norway, there are other countries as well, as he cites. The Iraqi Supreme Court ruled the operation as genocide. And earlier this year, the Norwegian government, as we've just heard, recognised the Anfal Campaign as genocide, stating that the judgment in Iraq, in accordance with international law, justified this decision. Sweden then followed with the Swedish Parliament, stating that based on research, statements from organisations, and the 2010 judgment in Iraq, was legally able to make this declaration. In the Netherlands, we have even seen a Dutch citizen successfully prosecuted for his part in this genocide. Frans van Anrat was tried at The Hague and charged, amongst other things, with selling chemicals, knowing they were going to be used for genocidal purposes. Such a charge required the court to decide whether or not the Anfal Campaign was indeed genocide. Unsurprisingly, they agreed it was. So there exists a judicial decision in Iraq, a decision at The Hague, and the decisions of other nations stating their support for the genocide that was committed against the Kurds. So the United Kingdom can act and make it clear to the world that this government recognises the genocide committed against the Kurdish people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, but beyond the legal arguments, there is another important dimension. Around the world, the United Kingdom carries enormous moral weight. I am proud that Britain is at the forefront of the international community when it comes to protecting human rights and standing up to regimes that threaten their people and their neighbours. That is why we must be at the forefront of this argument. Certainly.
Can I congratulate the honourable gentleman and stand shoulder to shoulder with him with his desire to see this recognised as a genocide. But in relation to the point he's just making, with almost 38 million Kurdish people across Syria, Iran, Iraq and Turkey, does he also think that this bolsters the position of Kurdish people today? And in fact, does he also believe, with tremendous concern at the position of Kurdish people in Turkey at the moment, that it is important that we recognise these past sins?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I think he's quite right. I don't think the Kurdish people can get closure on the dreadful, horrific crimes that were committed against them in Iraq. And this will go one step if this Parliament today recognises what took place as genocide and will send a clear message to all those countries who may at some point be tempted to attack their own people for their ethnicity, to certainly think twice about that. So I thank him for being here and supporting this motion.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I give way.
And I congratulate him on getting the debate and his speech today, which I think will do a great deal to create greater understanding of the plight of Kurdish people in all countries. Would he, however, reflect for one moment that whilst what happened in 1988 was genocide and was appalling, this country, to its shame, continued selling arms to Iraq and indeed took part in the Baghdad arms fair less than a year later and continued supplying weaponry to Iraq, which could and may well have been used against the Kurdish people in their continuing oppression?
Nadhim Zahawi.
Well, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, and I thank him for his intervention, that the Saddam Hussein spin machine, all the instruments of power that were available to him, including a number of people who lobbied very hard, this Parliament and the government of the time, to continue to do business with Saddam. But I have to, at this point, then recognise John Major in his contribution to safeguarding the Kurds in 1991, when Saddam used his helicopter gunships to attack the Kurdish people post the Iraq invasion of Kuwait, where this government and this country decided to place a no-fly zone to protect the Kurdish people as well as the people of the south of Iraq, the Shias of Iraq, who were coming under a similar attack. I will give way.
I congratulate the honourable gentleman on getting the debate today, but does he not see what he said today and what he's asking for as a step for justice for the Kurdish people across the Middle East? Because various countries of the Middle East have been mentioned, for example Turkey. So the way I see it, the honourable gentleman has done quite a service today if it starts, to use an expression, the ball rolling for justice for the Kurdish people across the Middle East, but in particular Turkey.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I think that if we can send a clear message today that we recognise what took place in Iraq as genocide against the Kurdish people, it will send a clear message, as I, in my response earlier, said to all those leaders of those countries in the region that they cannot, or they certainly should think twice before they decide to attack their own people, as we're seeing currently in Syria. Indeed, we know that today there's a conference in Rome where the Foreign Secretary is taking part to try and see what more we can do to safeguard the welfare of the Syrian people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would just returning to my earlier remarks, I am truly proud that Britain is at the forefront of the international community when it comes to protecting human rights. So recognising the Kurdish persecution as genocide will send a strong message to those totalitarian regimes around the world who may consider committing such acts. After all, history has shown us that when a dictator thinks they will get away with it, they will commit atrocities against their own people. We need only turn our gaze to Syria to remind ourselves of that. It is only by raising international awareness of these crimes that we will educate people against the intolerance and hatred that led to these heinous acts. It is only by providing the perpetrators of these crimes, by proving that the perpetrators of these crimes can and will be brought to justice, that we will make the dictators of this world think before they act. It is through the recognition of the Kurdish genocide that we can ensure these aims, and that the British nation can cement its position as a protector of liberty and human rights. I commend this motion to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper. Meg Munn.
Indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I refer to my entries in the Register of Members' Interests. It is an honour to speak in this important debate. Over the last 5 years, I have been involved with the Kurdistan region of Iraq all-party parliamentary group, which I am now proud to co-chair with my honourable friend, the member for Stratford-on-Avon, who has eloquently set out the reason for this debate. I should mention, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the all-party group is very active and has an excellent website with a range of views and news, and members can look at the issues around Kurdistan and look at the issues relating to this debate on that website at www.appgkurdistan.org.uk. Genocide, as my honourable friend has said, is the methodical killing of all the people from a particular national, ethnic or religious group. Today's debate is an important milestone towards persuading this House, the wider public and the international community to recognise the attempted genocide in Iraq of the Kurdish people by Saddam Hussein. As my honourable friend for Stratford has already said, an estimated 1 million Iraqis have disappeared since the 1960s, all presumed murdered by the regime. And as this year marks the 25th anniversary of the Anfal genocide operation against the Kurds, including the dreadful chemical attack on Halabja, as well as the 30th anniversary of the killing of 8,000 male members of the Bazani clan, the scale of these atrocities is clear and not seriously challenged. But few outside of the Kurdistan region understand what was involved in the mass slaughter, and fewer still understand the organisation and methods used in what has been described as Saddam's killing machine. It has been referred to as a prison above ground and a mass grave beneath. The targeting of the Kurdish people living in northern Iraq was designed to remove any possibility of opposition to the vile regime. Last night I watched again 2 DVDs which have been produced by the Iraqi Ministry of Human Rights about the terrible crimes committed by Saddam Hussein's regime, execution of people and dust talks. They include pictures of some of the atrocities filmed by the regime: shootings and beatings, the severing of ears of young men who had deserted the army. They show the devastation of the way of life of the marsh Arabs by the deliberate draining of the marshes, and of course the chemical attacks at Halabja and elsewhere. Today we only have words to try and describe what happened, and I fear they will fall short of portraying the full horror. These monstrous events have a contemporary relevance. Many families still do not know if a father, brother, sister is dead or not, do not know where their body may be buried, perhaps in some undiscovered mass grave. Not knowing about the fate of a member of the family weighs heavy. The impact of the killing continues and will continue for many, many years to come. It's important to remember just how closed and controlled a society Iraq was. There were few opportunities for contact with the outside world. After the no-fly zone was imposed over Kurdistan in 1991, the people had at last the opportunity to begin to develop their own democracy, to make their own decisions. But sustained contact with the outside world only really began after the 2003 invasion. And it was only then that we slowly began to understand the true scale of the horror. According to the International Commission on Missing Persons, in 2006, there were 270 mass graves, each estimated to contain between 10 bodies to 10,000 bodies. Since then, there have been many, many more mass graves uncovered. Of course, it was not just the Kurds who suffered under Saddam Hussein. The impact of 35 years of dictatorship are still very evident in all sections of the Iraqi population. I have visited Iraq a number of times and have been privileged to meet the politicians who are building their democracy. Some have shared with me their experiences of that dark time. Family members killed, tortured, or simply missing. I know that the number of widows in the country is simply huge. In Kurdistan today, many children are affected with cancers caused by the chemical weapons. Others live with the effects of barbaric torture. 10 years after the fall of the dictator, the health services are far from adequate to meet the needs of this population. But they are improving. In the UK, we've benefited from the Iraqi doctors who came to work here during the time of exile. And it is encouraging to see that many have returned or are now working to improve health services in their home country. Indeed, it was an Iraqi doctor in Sheffield who began the process which has led to significant partnerships between Sheffield Hallam University and the Iraqi Ministry of Health and Iraqi universities to provide much-needed skills for the health service. And a strong partnership has also developed with the Kurdistan regional government. Alongside the physical impact...
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Can I also raise the great support that's been given by the members of the Newcastle Gateshead Medical Volunteers, led by Diari Kira, who, as well as the people from Sheffield, have been going across to Kurdistan for a number of years now, and next month it will be the 8th time they've gone across, and they are treating people every year when they're there. Thousands and thousands of people have benefited from the relationship we've developed between our two countries.
I thank my honourable friend for bringing that partnership to the attention of the House. It is very true that there are many doctors in the UK of Iraqi and Iraqi Kurdish origin, and while they've continued to serve and provide support for our community, they also are doing such things as he has described and are doing what they can at a time when the health services in Iraq still need a great deal of investment to develop to serve an ordinary population, let alone a population that has suffered the kind of trauma and torture and chemical attacks that have been suffered in Iraq and particularly in Kurdistan. Alongside the physical impact of repression on the population, we must not underestimate the psychological effects, living with the grief of lost family members, remembering the terror of attacks, and above all, the constant fear. And as a woman says in the DVD I mentioned earlier, Iraqi people had no dignity because they had to sell out their consciences to Saddam Hussein to stay alive. 35 years of dictatorship is not easily forgotten, but there are positive moments since the 2003 invasion. We remember the TV pictures of the purple-stained fingers shown with pride when they were able to exercise the right to vote, something we take for granted. The Iraqi people were excited about being able to take part in the first democratic elections, but voting is, of course, only the first act. Building the institutions and democratic habits are much more difficult. All the more difficult when you have not been allowed to make your own decisions, and acting on your own initiative was a risky thing to do. My involvement with the Kurdistan regional and Iraqi national parliaments has shown me just how difficult this task is. But it is a task to which many brave Iraqis are committed. To take on these tasks and build a new society is complex and demanding. It will take time, dedication and determination. We should continue to support them in this. An important way to do that is to formally recognise what happened to them. Former French Foreign Minister Bernard Kouchner argues that human rights should mean that people are protected within their own countries. When these rights are violated, it is the duty of the international community to honour victims and to ensure history cannot repeat itself. If democratic governments cannot be clear about genocide and say that such crimes must be stamped out, then who will?
I thank her for giving way and very interesting points she's making. Does she also accept that there is a fairly systematic discrimination against Kurdish people, culture and language in all the neighbouring countries as well? And this is a product of the breakup of the Ottoman, the end of the First World War, and that all those countries have got to reckon with a multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic society if there's to be a long-term peace within the region.
Building the kind of society he describes, which recognises the right of people to their own language, their own culture, and to celebrate their own background, is enormously important, and it is very much part of this process. And while the process of building the democracies in Iraq and working with Iraqi parliamentarians are difficult, what is encouraging is to see Iraqis across all political groups and backgrounds working together. Next week we will have the Services and Reconstruction Committee from the Iraqi Parliament visiting us here, which is actually chaired by a Kurdish Yazidi woman. They will be coming here and they will contain people from all backgrounds and with all differences together, working together to try and build things for the Iraqi people. So I agree with much of what the Honourable Gentleman says.
She mentions very eloquently the position in France and the position of the French Foreign Minister, does she recall that just a few weeks ago 3 Kurdish women were shot dead in Paris? And it does convey the continued concern that we should all have about Kurdish people as they go about their business in Europe, and illustrates the point that's been made about why we must recognise genocide, but why we must also recognise that these are a people that continue to be routinely oppressed.
My right honourable friend is right, and I have particular concerns as well about the position of Kurdish people and other people indeed. There are currently over 70,000 dead in Syria, and with the ever-present fear of chemical weapons being used by that regime. A frightening reminder of the Halabja poison gas attack. Some of those effects, as we've already mentioned, of the 16th of March 1988 attack on Halabja are with us still. Disease, birth defects and other health complications. Can we easily accept the possibility that more victims of these weapons could arise today in Iraq's neighbouring country? We know of the genocide perpetrated against the Jews by the Nazis during the Second World War, and the excellent work undertaken by organisations such as the Holocaust Educational Trust to educate new generations about the horror. Every year we have Holocaust Memorial Day to honour the dead and ensure they are not forgotten. The story of the Kurdish genocide has yet to be fully told and is not yet fully understood. But the Kurdish people should not have to wait for justice from the international community any longer. Iraq has officially recognised the killings of genocide, and the rest of the world must do the same.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is an honour to sit next to my honourable friend, the member for Stratford, and I congratulate him for this debate today and for everything he has done on the All-Party Kurdistan Group, and I have been very proud to work with him on it. Now, in my last visit to Kurdistan, I remember being one evening in a restaurant, and I was sitting by chance next to one of the senior people of the Iraqi War Graves Commission. And she said to me something incredibly telling and really sums up why I'm here this afternoon. She said, "There is another Iraq buried under Iraq." And we had a big, huge amount of food, as is the Kurdish way, in front of us. And I literally, after she said that, I felt that I couldn't eat again that evening. Because to me it summed up the mass murder and the terrible crimes of Saddam Hussein. And later, with my honourable friend for Basildon and others, we went to see some of these graves. And it has left a marked impression on me since, and sums up why we have to recognise Saddam Hussein's genocide of the Kurds as exactly that. Now, we know that the actions of the Iraqi regime from the 1960s to 2003 were a sustained campaign of genocide against the Kurdish people. We mustn't make the mistake of just thinking everything started in 1988 with the Anfal. And second, that if it wasn't for muscular enlightenment and the military intervention, first from John Major and later from Tony Blair, that this final solution of the extermination of the Kurds would have been successful. And thirdly, recognition for the genocide, for the Kurds, is important, not just because it is morally right, but it is a warning to tyrants around the world, and it helps the survivors fight for justice in the international criminal courts. And let me explain what I mean. Raphael Lemkin, the Polish lawyer who coined the word genocide, defined it in 1944, and I quote, "as a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves." That is a perfect description of the campaign of persecution and murder which Saddam Hussein and his predecessors led against the Kurdish people. And the Kurds were repeatedly attacked by the Iraqi military from 1960 to 1970. In March 1970, Iraq publicly announced a peace plan to the world for Kurdish autonomy, but privately they started an aggressive Arabization program in the oil-rich regions of Kurdistan, forcibly removing people and seizing their property. In 1974, Iraq then began a new bombardment against the Kurds. In March 1975, Iraq and Iran signed the Algiers Accord, cutting humanitarian supplies to Kurdistan. And over the next 3 years, 200,000 Kurds were forcibly deported to other parts of Iraq. During the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, the regime implemented anti-Kurdish policies, pogroms in essence, and a civil war broke out. Iraq was condemned, but was never seriously punished.